All right, good morning, Mission Control. Today I have a very special live stream, kind of unplanned for me today, but I've been working with a middle school out of Camas, Washington. This is the Odyssey Middle School class, and they are called the Gryphons. Their teacher, Karen Motsinger, and I have spoken before, so I wanted to address some of the class's questions. It's been really awesome to work. Uh, well, it's been really, really inspirational actually for me to be able to do the work that we're doing here, trying to provide sustainable food and energy to our local community and sharing that on YouTube. And I get to see comments from all around the world. I get to see people in Cambodia, in Vietnam, in Australia, in the UK, Ireland, Sweden, Norway, and places from all around the world watching what we're doing. And one of the most inspirational things that I have is when people are talking about how maybe their parents and they're working with their kids and they use the Real Martian channel and the experiences that we have here and some of the crazy things that I do to help to guide, to inspire the children. So when I was approached by Karen and to help the class, they have a really just an amazing program. It's a very highly rated school, and they have this amazing program where instead of just doing what I understand is instead of doing basic classes, they do projects where they weave in math and history and science and all that together, and they have projects. So it's very real world. So it's very cool. And they asked me to do a live stream back from Hab One many years ago, and the kids loved it. So we did another stream a few weeks ago, kind of giving an update for the kids. And today they have sent me a whole long list of questions here that I am going to go through on this live stream for them. So this live stream is all for the sixth grade class at Odyssey Middle School, the Gryphons. So let us jump in. What we got here, the very first question is, how can you grow something if you don't have the seeds? This is from Kennedy, it looks like. Well, Kennedy, that's really tough. Some plants you can clone, meaning that if you have the plant, you have to have some form of the plant. And if you do have that, then there are techniques where you can clone that plant. Now, this isn't like watching a movie where you create a duplicate of yourself. It is a very well-known technique that's been around for a very long time, and I'm not an expert at it, so I don't want to mislead you, but I would encourage you to go do some research on plant cloning. Not every plant can be cloned, but some of them can. If you have things like potatoes, I'm sure you've done the experiment with a potato where if you have a potato and before it's cooked, if you actually let it sit out in the sun, or in a kind of a damp or moist place with a little bit less sunlight, it'll actually start to sprout. We had a whole bag of them sprout in our garage. So those things, those root vegetables, some of them you can grow without having to have a seed. But plant cloning is kind of the big way that you would do it without seeds. So it's a great question, Kennedy. Charlotte asks, how much insulation did we use? And this is for Hab 1. And Charlotte, we used a whole bunch of insulation. I forget the total quantity, but I think what you're really trying to ask me is how thick was the insulation. Our insulation was about, depending on where you measure it, 4 to 5 inches thick. And actually, Evan has a question right behind you that says, what kind of insulation did you use? And Terrence has a question right behind him. What was the insulation made of? So to answer all of your questions, it's about 4 to 5 inches thick, and it was made of rock wool. And that's a organic substance, rock, essentially stringy rock. And it's mold resistant and has some water resistant properties. So it was a good solution for us. It was working very, very well. But as we spoke about in the last stream, when you guys are designing your systems that go on Mars, because that's their project, they're designing greenhouses for Mars. I think that's way cool, by the way, guys. You're so lucky to be able to do that. We spoke about that insulation is one of the biggest things you need to consider. So You might be looking at different types of insulation. You might be looking at spray foam insulation, or if you're on Mars, and let's say that you had unlimited money, and even actually if you're on Mars, I would encourage you to look at a substance known as aerogel, AEROGEL. It is a semi-translucent, meaning you can see through it, substance. It's extremely light, and it is the world's greatest insulator. And I mean, it is the #1 insulator on the planet right now. And if you could get your hands on aerogel and use that as your insulation, that's what I would have used. But it's very expensive. But for your project, if you're going to Mars, I would encourage you to check out aerogel. So let's see here. Sebastian asked, what plants did you see as most important? Well, Sebastian, that depends on how you want to measure importance. So, for example, if you're on Mars, you're probably growing plants not just for food, but also to create oxygen, in which case your leafies, anything that has a lot of leaves, is going to produce a lot of oxygen. So things like lettuce or broccoli, cauliflower, those types of things have big leaves. So those might be your most important. But if you're talking about food, then to me, what was most important were potatoes and corn, because they're high calorie crops that yield a lot. So those are very important to me. The fish, if you consider them a crop, are also extremely important because they create the nutrients that the plants need. Abigail asks, if you could make any major changes in the greenhouse, what would that be? Abigail, that is an excellent question. Well, I would say the structure itself was one that I would change. The greenhouse, so one of the big problems that we had is the amount of energy required to maintain the environmental controls in the greenhouse. And the type of greenhouse that I chose originally had a solid opaque cover. Let a little bit of light in, but not a lot. So if you remember, we actually changed it. We ended up putting a whole new top on it, and part of that top was clear and part of the top was opaque. But the structure itself and the greenhouse itself, I would have radically changed. And that's what we're doing for HAB 2, our new design, is it's all really all about the structure. That's the most complicated piece, is finding an economical way to bring light in naturally, because that reduces your power requirements, and also brings in UV, which helps reduce your pest as well. But then how do you insulate a clear section of roofing? That's why our aerogel will be great. So if I could change anything, it would be the structure, which is what I changed the most. So good question. And that question could be unpacked for a long time. But let's move on to Charlie's. Charlie Parker, did your childhood experiences affect your current work life? Oh, this one's going to be deep. If so, how and why do you think that is? If not, is there anything you have done that has affected your work performance? Oh my goodness gracious. Charlie, that is an amazing question. Folks, these are 6th graders. This is a live stream, so I got not just you, Gryphons, but I'm also talking to the world here. So let's see here. Charlie, that is an amazing question. Did my childhood experiences affect your current work life? Well, yeah, yes, they did. The things that my parents taught me, the things that my teachers taught me, I still remember the great teachers. They jump out in my mind, and they open my mind, and my friends and the things that I did, both good and bad, impacted my life. Now, luckily, I have amazing parents who, when they saw me doing things that weren't really on the good path, they corrected me. I got in trouble, and my mom would tell me, you are who your friends are. And in the Bible, it says that too, bad company corrupts good character. And these are simple sayings, but they mean a lot. And the people that were in my life when I was younger, my friends, my family, they all impacted my life. So yes, definitely my childhood experiences affect your life. How and why? Well, I mean, the big things were they kept me from getting in trouble. And, if you're in trouble, it's very difficult to do anything meaningful because you're in trouble. So by having people around who were watching out for me, who loved me, who took the time to care for me, they kept me from making bad decisions. And when you're young, it's difficult. It's difficult to know what the right thing to do is. You might think you know, uh, but the world is very complicated. So by having people around of different races and creeds and ages, your friends, your family, and if you have an open mind and you listen to them, not all their wisdom that they give you is wise, advice that they give you, I should say. But if you're willing to listen, then you are more likely to make good decisions, which will help you be successful. And that's, I think, the biggest thing that helped me. That's how they helped me. So thank you to my friends and my family who are willing to correct me so that I would do the right thing. Uh, yeah, I think that's your question. Why do you think that is? Yeah. Yep. Okay, Charlie, that was an amazing question. Great question. Kinder asks, how much research did you have to do? What is some information you are still wanting to test, and what information are you confident in? Oh my goodness gracious. Guys, you have amazing questions. Okay, Kinder, I have done over 5 years of research. So that's off and on. That's not 5 years straight, but that's throughout the course of 5 years, I researched multiple papers. Um, it's not just reading Wikipedia, as your parents will tell you, as your teachers will tell you. You have to go dig into published journals and books and sources of information that are known to be trustworthy or peer reviewed. And it took me 5 years to get through a lot of that information. Uh, what is some information you are still wanting to test, and what information are you confident in? Well, with everything that we did in Hab 1, the facilities, the digester, everything like that, the stuff that I still need to test are our new grow structures, which will be on YouTube here in the coming months, because we changed them to optimize them, to make them easier. So those need to be tested, and that's really the only thing that remains to be tested because it's new. Everything else that we're doing, like solar power, wind, those things have been tested in industry. So I don't really have to prove that solar power works, for example. I just have to use the right amount of it, you know. And then I guess when we do build Hab 2 and LifePod 2, the structure itself, how it performs in the heat and cold, the structure testing, that's going to be important because it'll be testing our insulation solution. And for our new insulation solution, to the folks that asked that before, there's a spray and foam, a green foam is what it's called, that I'll be using on the new versions. Good question. Ziana, I'm sorry if I didn't say your word just right, or your name just right, sorry. How big is your new greenhouse going to be? What systems do you have to control the temperature or how much water each plant gets? Okay, if you've looked on our YouTube channel, you see that LifePod 2 is a 53-foot long trailer, and it's about 8 feet tall and about 8 feet wide, roughly. So that's how big it's going to be. And let's see, what's some, where'd it go? I just lost it here. Sorry. What systems do you have to control? And it will be controlled similar to what we did in Hab 1. It'll have sensors and valve actuators, which will be controlled by a computer. And then we'll be using an artificial intelligence that will be monitoring those systems and making changes to it as it goes. So it's very cool. Chase asks, will the plants mostly be used for eating or experiments, or will they be used for something else? It's another great question. You guys are on a roll here. The plants that we're going to be growing will be mostly used for eating. That is the intent. Now, the first ones will probably be mostly experimental. We'll expect that many of them will fail. One thing I want to tell all you guys is if you watch my channel, then you know that I believe that people should try things, even if that means they're going to fail. And when you're doing science, when you're experimenting, you have to know that failure is just as important as success. So if you do something and it fails, do not get discouraged, because what that's telling you is something that doesn't work. And when you're up front and when you're out in front of others and you're doing things that haven't been done before, failure comes with the territory. So don't be scared of failure. So when you're doing experiments, you expect things to fail. And what that's doing is it's teaching you what doesn't work. So keep good notes and make sure you're learning and that you don't do that again. So yes, the first ones will probably be experiments and oxygen, cleaning CO2 and oxygen. If you're going on Mars, that's what the plants really, that's what NASA's using them for. They don't really care so much about the food. They care so much about the atmosphere. So Dylan, have any of your greenhouse designs ever been considered by a space corporation that plans to send astronauts to Mars? Well, not yet, Dylan, but we're hoping that as we get into HAB 2 and LifePod 2 that we will be able to work with those people. I certainly spend time on the phone or on Zoom these days talking to people in those industries and trying to make connections so that we can, because we believe we do have a good solution. Brandon asked, what type of research and what type of sources did you have to look into making the greenhouse compatible for plants to live and thrive? Okay, Brandon, that's a great question. The research, again, like we spoke about earlier, I looked at a lot of journals, a lot of books, searching the internet. I had to look at different companies and what types of things they built so that I could understand what I could buy and what was available or what things I had to make. Yeah, that's the answer to your question. So there's the research of what you want to do, and then there's actually figuring out how you're going to do it, how you're going to make it in the real world, and that's where the fun comes in. It's also where the hard work comes in. There's a lot of great ideas, but not everything can be made. So you really have to think about how it's going to be manufactured, or if you're going to buy it. That's called a make-buy decision when you get into that part of engineering. So there's a lot of good stuff there. Good question, Brandon. Jackson asks, what's your favorite plant to grow? Well, I think potatoes would probably be my favorite. I wouldn't be the real Martian if we didn't enjoy growing potatoes. If you haven't watched the movie The Martian, you need to go watch the movie The Martian, with your parents' permission, of course. Lyle asks, why do different plants need different types of light? And is there that type of light on Mars? Okay, that just amazing question. Great question. Okay. Why do different plants need different types of light? Okay, so it depends on the chemistry, the biology of what makes up the plant. So plants take light and nutrient and converts, using light, it converts that into its energy. So it's food. Just like how we take in food and water, and then our stomach, and through a chemical process, a chemical and mechanical process, we digest that into nutrients that feed our body. That's why you are what you eat, because what you eat turns into you. That turns into your cells. Well, plants, they take light and they take nutrients, and they, through a process called photosynthesis, which I'm sure you guys are studying, they convert that into its energy, which then allows it to grow, creates its cells, and powers it. So depending on what type of plant it is and what it's trying to grow, it may need different types of light. And if you're studying the spectrum of light, you know that plants usually need the red and the blue spectrum of light. But a lot of studies have been done to say that, well, that's true. The plants that are very green, they need that spectrum. But what they're also finding is really they also need the infrared light that comes in, which is your heat light, and also the UV, the ultraviolet light. And so really, even though studies are originally shown that especially with LED technologies, that red and blue lighting was really good, they're kind of coming back into saying, well, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that we weren't thinking of, and really full spectrum light is the best way to go. So in our new designs, we've actually gone back over to full spectrum. We did that decision based on our experience, where when we just had the red and blue lights, we were having a pest problem, and the plants weren't as healthy and vibrant as they should be, and we believe that's because they lacked UV. So we believe you got to have that UV lighting in there, and you can get different types of lighting for that. But that's a little bit off of your question here, so I want to make sure I come back to that. I just lost your question. Sorry, I'm looking for it here. Types of light on Mars. Okay, so part of lighting is something called the photosynthetically active radiation, or PAR. And when you're choosing what type of lighting you need, the PAR, PAR, identifies the intensity of light. So if you have an old light bulb, you know, if you put your hand right next to the light bulb, you can feel a lot of heat energy coming off of that. And then as you move further and further away, you don't feel that heat. Well, light is the same way. The further you move away, I think it's 1 over r squared, 1 over the distance squared, you lose energy. So Earth, if this is the sun and this is Earth, right, that, and let's say this is a light bulb, you would feel quite a bit of heat right here. But as you move away, like at Mars right here, you have less heat, less light. So the amount of light, or the type of light that's available on Mars when you're outside the atmosphere, is the exact same type of light that's available at Earth, right? Because it's just solar light from the sun. But because it's so far away, there's a lot less of it. So what we want to really consider when you're outside the atmosphere is the PAR, the PAR, outside that atmosphere. Now, the reason I keep saying outside the atmosphere is because if this is the outer atmosphere and this is the ground at Mars, then the atmosphere changes the light as well. So the composition of the atmosphere, like on Mars, it's mostly CO2. That's your gas. On Earth, it's mostly nitrogen. That's also a gas. And we have oxygen as well, which allows us to breathe. So as light comes through, it changes the spectrum a little bit of light because of the type of gas that it's moving through. So on Mars, you'd be concerned about the PAR, and you'd be concerned about the spectrum as it changes. Now, I think in general, people have concluded that there's not enough light coming from the sun through the atmosphere on Mars to grow vibrant plants. It'd be a little dark there. In addition, besides that, you have dust storms that take up the entire planet, and they last for months. So you can't do something that depends on natural light on Mars. If you get natural light on Mars, it's a good day. Kaylee writes, what are some plants and food that you recommend to grow on Mars? Okay, that's a great question. Well, first is potatoes. You have to grow potatoes, and it's not just because of the movie. It's because potatoes are such a good food. Now, if you can, you'd want to grow sweet potatoes because they're considered a superfood. They're filled with nutrients. They have all the carbohydrates, proteins, everything that you would need, and you can use them in a bunch of different ways. So a potato of some sort, also known as a tuber, would be one of the key things that you definitely want to grow. Other things you want to grow, boy, oh boy, kale would probably be a good one. It's another one, a nutrient-rich food that can be used in a bunch of different ways. It could be used for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. It's also great at oxygen creation. I personally think corn would be one I'd want to go with, and the reason, but it's a kind of an energy-intensive crop, so you may not want to do it. But corn is good not just for eating, but you can also turn it into flour. So those would be ones that I'd look at, but really potatoes, tubers, those would be the big guys. If you want to do it for food, kale would be good. Beans, a type of bean. What you want to look at is crops that take up a small amount of area and produce a large yield. So you want to get as big a yield as possible with as small as area as possible. And those would be the ones you'd want to go after. Of course, if they have the nutrients. So a lot of research there, and it really depends on your diet too. What things do you want to eat? Let's see here. If you're growing two types of plants, would they be in separate places? Bryce Stanton asked that question. And Bryce, a long time ago, well, not too long ago, people really like the idea of, it's called monoculture, where you grow one, that's the word mono, that's what it means. The root word mono means that, one singular crop in a certain area. This is great for, what type of nutrients and water you put into the soil for that particular location. You kind of optimize it, and then they're easier to pollinate because they're next to each other. But I think if you look at our old timers and look at our past, the people that have grown food for a very long time, they're going to argue that that's not a good way to do things. And I think they're right. It's called complementary planting, where you plant one type of crop next to another. And what they're finding is that these plants work really, really well with each other. One plant, for example, might let off a pheromone, which is a type of chemical that puts away pests that would naturally be attracted to this other plant. So if you put them next to companion planting, sorry, I said complementary, but they are complementary to each other, but they're companion planting. So you don't necessarily want to have all of one crop right next to each other. Sometimes you want to mix things in with it to help manage your pest or to help create a healthier crop. Also, some plants are called nitrogen fixing and some are nitrogen taking. Corn is a big nitrogen taking type of plant. And I think peas are a nitrogen fixing. And nitrogen, if you've studied it, you know that that is a key. That is the key thing that plants need. They need that nitrogen cycle to work. The nitrates and nitrites, that's their plant food. So you need to be able to get those back into the soil. So if you put a fixer next to a taker, you tend to kind of equal things out. So I would study companion planting and figure out what the best thing you can do there is. Okay, Ella asks, if your greenhouse were to go to Mars, can it break down easily? Is there a lot of materials that need to be transported? Also, do you have a backup plan if the greenhouse were to fail on Mars? Oh my goodness, guys. Where are you getting these questions? These are awesome questions. You guys are super freaking smart. Okay, if your greenhouse were to go to Mars, can it break down easily? Well, Hab 1, the answer would have been yes. In Hab 2, the answer is going to be not so much. Here's the thing. When you're creating something out of technology, the more complicated it is, meaning the more moving parts it has, the more likely it is to break down. Murphy's Law comes into effect here. Anything that can go wrong probably will go wrong. So what we want you to use is the KISS philosophy. Keep it simple, all right? So we want to keep it as simple as possible. And when you're first designing something, usually you have that in the back of your mind, but you got to get something built and tested. And then once it turns into something in the real world, you can actually start making it simpler. You got to see how it works, see what doesn't work, and then you've got to fix the things that don't work, and then you've got to start taking out complexity. And the best way to do that is to have something that you can actually work with. If you don't have, you guys live in a time that you're going to have tools that I never had access to before. If you can create stuff in virtual reality, you can do the same thing, not exactly, but very close, as building something in the real world. And you will have those tools as you grow up. I have a VR headset right behind me over here, but I don't have all the tools to make everything virtual like what I'm talking about. But being able to make stuff and put it in the real world is an experience that is second to none. Even with virtual reality, you still need to make it eventually. So you want to make it and then remove complexity. Is there a lot of materials that need to be transported? Well, yeah. So here's a big thing. If you're going to Mars, I think right now the cost per pound is about $1 million per pound to take something from Earth and get it up into orbit. And then it's even more to get it to Mars. That's a lot of money. This coffee cup is about £1. That's $1 million coffee cup. It's filled with coffee. That's a very expensive coffee cup to take to Mars. So what people are thinking of, what I would do is I would send the machines that allow me to use soil and chemicals that are on Mars to create the structures and the things that I would need. Now, that's not going to work for everything, but what it will allow me to do is minimize the amount of things that I need to send. So you really want to consider if you can build it out of the soil that's already on Mars, and there's studies and there's papers that you guys can get that will tell you what type of soil composition there is, and you could potentially even play around with that. Do you have a backup plan if the greenhouse were to fail on Mars? The backup plan is to have food in storage. So you want to have things like meals ready to eat, MREs, freeze-dried food, astronaut food. You'd want to have that available so that, yeah, if your greenhouse fails, or even if your greenhouse doesn't fail, if your power fails, then everything fails. So you'd want to have those backups. So that's what we do there. Colin asks, if you have had the chance to go to Mars, would you go? How do you plan to get enough sunlight during sandstorms? Okay, another great question. All right, Colin, a long time ago for me, I decided to go to Embry-Riddle University and become an aerospace engineer because it was the #1 university in the country for aerospace engineering, and the #1 degree that would help you be an astronaut was an aerospace engineer. Now that's kind of changed now, so if you're interested in being an astronaut, go to NASA's website and check out how they're hiring people right now, because they're looking for a little more diversity in the skills that they're taking to Mars. Your generation's going to Mars, so you have this opportunity. I also joined the Air Force in the Reserve Officer Training Corps, ROTC, to help pay for my college. And then I joined the Air Force because it would also allow me the highest chance of becoming an astronaut. That's how the numbers were. The people that are getting hired were Air Force people with aerospace engineering degrees or pilots or test pilots. And in the Air Force, I was on my way to go to test pilot school, so I could be what's called a flight test engineer. I didn't want to be a pilot. I like flying, but memorizing is something I'm not good at. You got to be a good memorizer for pilots. And I had done all the stuff that was right, and I was on that path, and I was actually going to get my physical so I could submit my application. Uh, uh, and what I discovered is that I actually have a flutter in my heart. And when you're going to be an astronaut, stuff like that, you're not going to be competitive. So I wanted to be an astronaut. That's what I was doing. And God had different plans, so I had to change my plans to what He wanted me to do. So yeah, I would love to go to Mars. But now I'm married, and I have to think about my wife, and I don't think she wants to go to Mars. But if I could go there and come back, I think I might be able to pull that one off. How do you plan to get enough sunlight during sandstorms? I think we kind of spoke about that already. You can't really get sunlight during sandstorms, so you need to get artificial lighting is your primary solution. Justin asks, where would you get the money for a greenhouse? Well, Justin, what I did is I worked really, really hard and I saved up money. I got a good job. I got a good education. I got a good job that allowed me to have some extra money. And instead of buying a Porsche or a fancy car, I went and bought a greenhouse. So I'd say hard work is one way to do it. If you're doing projects, then what you might want to consider is crowdfunding. Maybe you want to put together a crowdfunding site and say what your class is doing or what you're working on and how what you're going to do is help other people. You could run a YouTube channel and make money from that, or have a Patreon account. You could go ask people to invest in your greenhouse project, in which case they get some ownership of what you're doing and they get to have a say. Those are all ways that you can raise money. Manuel writes, would there be any possibility that the plants would not grow fast enough, or will the plants already be growing while being sent to Mars? Oh, that's a great idea. All right, well, I think we spoke about Manuel. So if we make it really simple, yes, you could grow things on the way to Mars, but would you want to? There's benefits psychologically for people growing plants. It's a long trip, 6 to 9 months, in a very small tin can, essentially, smaller than a submarine. And you're in close quarters. So having something to go do, like working with plants, something from Earth, psychologically would help people feel good. But would you want to bring those down to the surface? I think probably not. That's a little too complicated. What they'd probably do is leave the plants on the spaceship, and then they would grow additional plants down below. Maybe they start things up top and bring them down below, down to the surface. But I think you'd probably want to have the full capability to be able to germinate and start everything down on the surface. It'll be lighter, which will cost less money. Sending seeds up there, a whole bunch of seeds, is a lot cheaper than sending small starts and all the stuff that goes with that and the infrastructure. So I think you'd want to have everything so you can grow it down on the surface rather than bringing it down with you. And plants do grow at different speeds. That's something they're going to have to figure out. What are common problems in the greenhouse? Daniel D. asks. Well, the big problem, humidity, mold, fungus, bugs. Those are the things you really got to worry about. Those are big problems. So you want to keep an eye out for those. Fletcher, what kept you going on this project? My goodness, guys, you got some deep questions. Okay. Well, as we spoke in the last video, I really felt like God was telling me I needed to do this project. And honestly, that's a really big part of it, my faith. So I really feel like this is something I'm supposed to be doing. And when it gets rough, I fall back on that. There's not a day that goes by that I don't feel like maybe I made a mistake, like maybe I should stop, maybe I should quit. But I don't feel like I'm supposed to. I don't believe it. It's a gut feeling that tells me I shouldn't stop. And also, what we're doing is very important. Trying to figure out how to bring sustainable food and energy to our local community, I think, is an extremely important and noble thing to go do. I think we're going to see in the coming months that food security is very important. So what we're doing is going to be very important. Okay, that was Fletcher's. Okay, Preston asks, in an estimate, how many seeds have you planted in the greenhouse? Oh, if you include microgreens, thousands of seeds. If you include individual plants, probably about 100. Connor asks, if you could be on a colony on Mars, would you go, and how was your Hab 1 powered? Also, what is your favorite candy? Oh, there we go. That's a good question. All right, so we already spoke about the colony on Mars. I would love to go, but I have to think about my wife. And Hab 1 was powered by solar and the anaerobic digester, but also we connected it to the grid because we didn't have enough solar power for it at night. What is my favorite candy? I think a Snickers bar, probably my favorite candy. Baby Ruth would be right next to it, but my favorite treat is ice cream. Caleb writes, the greenhouse you're making is made to withstand Mars, but are you planning on getting a greenhouse on Mars? If so, are you making it, or the design of it? Well, Hab 2 would be something that I have designated each of my halves with a number. So Hab 1 was the first one, Hab 2 is the second one. I think by the time I get to a Hab 10 design, Hab X, Roman numeral X stands for 10, I think that one would be capable of going to Mars. But we have a lot of stuff to work out before then. Caleb writes, the greenhouse you're making is made, that was Caleb. Okay, I got to keep track of these here. Devante, could I live off of just a greenhouse on Mars? Would it give me all the food I need? It depends. Devante, it depends. Could you? Yes. Would you be happy? A single greenhouse and just you? You're probably going to get tired of what you're eating. Here on Earth, we have a diversity, a whole bunch of different foods that you can eat. However, on Mars, on a single greenhouse, you're probably going to be limited in what you're going to be cooking. You might get really tired of all the different ways that you could cook a potato. So you can definitely do it. You can get enough protein, you can get enough carbohydrates and vitamins and everything that you need, fats to live. You have to make sure you recycle everything, which gets a little dirty, if you know what I mean. You could. But you really want more than one greenhouse. You want to have a tropical greenhouse, a temperate greenhouse, a cold greenhouse. You want to have ones that can grow all these different types of foods. And you probably want to have some chickens and different things that make different types of proteins, so you can have a diverse amount of food. You know, pizza is really, really good, but if you eat pizza every day of your life, eventually, believe it or not, you will get tired of eating pizza. Isabella asks, what would you need to plant and how much of it to sustain 4 people? Oh, now that is a very complicated question. That's one that I have spent months working on and created a large math model to do. The answer is it depends. So we all need, but to give you a hint of how you would do this math, it is very complicated because there's so many things you have to consider in it. The math itself is arithmetic, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. But it's also time. Well, it's a little bit algebra too because it's time-based. You have to know how long it takes for things to grow, so that you can figure out how much space you need. So you got to figure out what you want to eat. You need to have a mixture of fruits, vegetables, and proteins. And proteins would be like your meat sources, like fish, chicken, rabbits, those types of things. You're not going to take a cow to Mars. That's not a good idea. That'd be cool, though. So you would have to figure that all out, and then you have to figure out how much space do you need for each of those. That's a really good math problem. And I'd encourage you guys to do that math problem because it is very insightful and it shows you how much space you really need for stuff. You can go online and you can do a search for, how much space do I need to sustain a family of 4 on land, and there's some great books that are out there that'll show you. And if you replicated that, you get really close. But if you really want to do the math of it, it's involved. Larkin asks, how long did it take you to make a greenhouse, and how many years have you been doing this? Well, I worked by myself mostly, and it took me 3 years essentially to get Hab 2 to where it was at because I was working by myself for the most part. I had family and friends who come over and help me with some things that I could not do by myself, but I never wanted to take advantage of them. So I didn't ask them to come over all the time and help me. So that's why it took so long. But if you had a team of people, you could get it up and you knew what you wanted, you could get it up in a few days, maybe a few weeks. And I have been doing this now for over 11 years. Keenan asks, will you ever team up with NASA to make a greenhouse on Mars? I hope so. Megan asks, why did you choose this design? I didn't choose this design as much as I came to this design based off of the requirements. So when you're doing design work, when you're doing engineering, you want to start with your requirements. You want to say, what do I want to do? And then once you figure out what you want to do, you figure out how you can do it. You do the math. And then after you figure out how you can do it, you figure out if you can build it. And once you get to the if you can build it part, you have to make a decision of, am I going to buy something or am I going to make something? And then you loop through that process. That process is a loop. You don't do it once, you have to do it a few times. And the reason why is you might come all the way to the point where you decide you want to buy something, but you can't find it. It's not available to buy. So you'd have to make it. So then you have to go back through your design process and change it because of that thing that you discovered. So I came to the Have One design out of that process. Maddie asks, what are the easiest plants to grow? Lettuce. Lettuce is the easiest plant to grow, and strawberries be a good one to grow too. Herbs, pretty simple to grow, but lettuce is your go-to. Always start with lettuce. Addison asks, what are foods that wouldn't be a good idea to try to grow in a greenhouse? What are foods that wouldn't be? Oh, that's an interesting. Okay, looking at the question differently. Well, a greenhouse, you can grow pretty much anything in a greenhouse. Tall trees, we did dwarf trees. Those are small trees. You could do those in a greenhouse. There's not much you can't grow in a greenhouse, actually. Stuff that gets really tall won't work. I think that's about it. I can't think of anything. We got some people following along here. If you guys are looking at the comments, maybe you guys can think of something, folks that are following along. All right. We already spoke about how long I've been working on it. What are the ways to make the structure stronger so that it doesn't collapse like yours originally did? Yeah, that's not a fun day. Change the type of structure, change the type of covering, which is what we'd be doing. You don't want to use a fabric. You want to use something stronger. So you look at your materials and the strength of your materials, and then you change your structure based on that. So think of like a house. A house has a hard roof, and if you took off the hard roof and you put the plastic roof on, it would look cool, but it would fail. So going with something stronger, a different type of design. Okay, Kaylee asks, how long did it take you to figure out what insulation to use? What are some examples of insulation that didn't work? Okay, well, actually, let's see here. I came to two possible ways of doing insulation. First one is doing a double layer of plastic and putting an air gap in between the outer skin and the inner skin. This is a very popular way of doing greenhouse insulation, but it wasn't practical for how I wanted to, for the structure that I had to install it. And it did not create enough thermal barrier to give me the thermal properties that I needed, the insulation I needed. So that one was struck out. And then it was basically down to, well, what's available? I can't spray something into the structure that I had because it wouldn't hold. We didn't have structure for that. So that was not available. So then it really did come down to, for this particular type of building, the only type of insulation that was available was the type that I put in, the rock wool. Okay, Brandon asked, how long would the greenhouse last on Mars? Well, we'd want it to last at least 20 years. I mean, when you're designing something, you want to design it to last a long time, but sometimes you have to make a choice about how long it's going to last. If you want something to last 100 years, then it's going to be very expensive. And so choosing a lifespan of about 20 years makes sense, and in 20 years, technology is going to change and that probably get worn down and you probably want to replace it anyway. So 20 years would be a good design life. 10 years would be a great design life, just so you know. And for the very first one, if you can get one that lasts 5 years, that would be a great design life for the very first time to Mars. But I would say somewhere between 5 to 20 years would be what you'd want it to, how long you'd want it to last. And the big thing that you have up there, the wind, the air pressure, the atmospheric pressure is less than it is here on Earth. And what that means is when the winds blow, there's not as much force. So even though they blow really fast, it's not as strong. If you were to stand in it, you wouldn't feel as much force on your chest because the atmospheric pressure is different. It's less weight, less mass. The biggest thing that you'd have to worry about on Mars, two biggest things. Primary is going to be radiation. Radiation degrades materials, so you have to choose materials that can withstand the radiation that's coming in, solar radiation, the solar winds. And the second is going to be abrasion, because even though the wind blows with less force, it does carry all those dust particles with it, and that's like sandblasting. Radiation and abrasion would be the two ways that you would really fail if you're on Mars. Presley writes, what were some of the harder things you had to go through, and how did you handle you not maybe giving? I think not giving up probably is what you meant, Presley. What were some of the harder things you had to go through? Oh boy, well, I'm going through a hard one right now. Honestly, I left my job. My wife and I decided to leave my job and do this full time. The Real Martian and the project, and then COVID happened, and investors for this startup. They were doing a startup. It's very difficult to do a startup, to run your own company and to get things going. And it's one of the hardest things it's the hardest thing I've ever had to do, actually. And I've gone to Iraq and was in Baghdad during wartime, and it's really tough. And if it wasn't for my faith, I'd have a really hard time. If it wasn't for my wife and people in my life that give me support mentally, it would be very difficult for me to keep going. There's a lot of things that I've done that haven't worked. There's some things that I've done that have worked, and it's difficult to keep going every day sometimes, as we spoke about earlier. But my faith is a very big part of what keeps me going. Grace, if it works on Mars, will you try to get it on the moon? Oh, yeah. I mean, you'd probably get it to the moon first is what we're all going to end up doing. But yeah, absolutely. Man, I would love to go to the moon. That's a definite yes. Is it hard to grow food in a greenhouse? Kaylin, I hope that I said that right, Kaylin. Kaylin, it's not necessarily hard as much as it is you need to know what you're doing. It's not something you can just go do. You can go out and put up a greenhouse and you can put stuff in it and you will see things grow. But will they grow well? Will you get a harvest? Will you get a lot of pests? Will you get fungus and mold? Those are all things that a greenhouse requires you to understand. I would encourage you all to play around with it and to learn, to read some books. Reading is very, very important. Reading what other people have done, or watching on YouTube what other people have done before you go and do something, is very important. I think everyone would encourage you to go do that. And that'll give you the basics of things you need to look at. But really, in a greenhouse, the big concerns you have are pests, which include your bugs and your fungus and little black dot stuff and mildew. It's all yucky stuff. And if you don't control the humidity correctly, or the temperature correctly, or the nutrients correctly, then those things can get out of control and you can have a big mess. Caitlin writes, do y'all grow radishes? And if you do you eat the greens? Also, how much does it cost to build a greenhouse? Okay, we did grow radishes. We grew radish microgreens, and we grew radishes in the aquaponics that we had in Hab 1. Right now we're growing radishes in the garden. And as far as do we eat the greens, the microgreens, yes, they're very good. For the big leaves, I don't think my wife uses them in cooking, but she might. You certainly can. I'm not a big fan of radishes. My dad was, but I'm not. Also, how much does it cost to build a greenhouse? Well, it depends on the size of the greenhouse. Now, the Hab that you saw, that cost $250,000 to build, so it's not something that everyone's going to go build, and we got to get that price way down, but it was a really big one. There are greenhouses that cost even more than that because they're made of glass and they have a lot of systems and controls in them. They're really, really pretty. And there's ones that cost less than that by a lot because they're made of PVC pipe and some plastic. So you can get a greenhouse built for way different prices, and it depends on how big and how much food you want to get out of it. The greenhouse that we had was designed to feed 16 adults. So that's a pretty big greenhouse. Not something you'd have just in your own backyard. Looks like we got about 6 questions left here. Odin writes, how would things change if you were in the same situation with a group of people? I think you mean the situation I'm in right now, or like with the Have One. If I had a team of people, I think Have One would have been more successful, because when you work in a team, you get diversity of thought. This is why diversity is so important. We want people who think differently than us, who have different opinions than us, because they'll look at a problem differently than we do, and you'll avoid what is called groupthink. Groupthink is when a group of people are so close to each other that they think very similar to each other, and they all come to the same conclusion, but they miss other possibilities of doing things. So they become less effective. They're less efficient. So when you put together teams, you want them to be diverse. You want to have people of different backgrounds, different race, different religions, because their life experiences will shape them differently, and you will be able to look at problems more constructively, and you will come up with a stronger solution. So I think if I had a group of people, that we would have had a stronger solution, and it would have been less likely to fail. Sadie asked, if you have the chance to go to Mars, would you? We already spoke about that, Sadie. I would love to go, but now I got to think about my wife. Corbin, I definitely want to go and come back, by the way. I'm not a one-way type of guy. Earth is amazing. Going to Mars would be an experience second to none, and something that I would love to go do and to be a part of. It's part of human history when we do that. But I want to come back. There's no place like home. And Earth is a very, very special planet, and we do need to take care of it because it is very special. Corbin asks, what are some problems you had, and did you... Oh, it looks like it got cut off. I think we spoke about a lot of the problems that we had already, Corbin, so I'm going to move on just because your question was cut off. But shoot me, if you want me to, if you had more on that question, shoot it to me, and I'll address you via email. Alexander asks, how much will the greenhouse cost to maintain? That's a good question. Maintenance is defined in labor and money. Labor equals time equals money, of course, so it all comes back to money. But and then you also have the maintenance costs of like parts, things that you have to buy. And the answer is it depends. You're going to learn in life that the answer is usually it depends, and it's the worst answer ever. Oh, I hate that answer, but it's true. It really depends on the situation, on the circumstances, how complicated it is, what you're growing, how many parts you have. The less parts you put into your greenhouse, the lower the cost. That's why you want to keep it simple. Always keep it simple. So get as much complexity out of the system as you can so that your maintenance costs are lower, and make the system as easy to use as possible, which may increase complexity so that you reduce your labor cost, which is time or money if you're paying someone to do it. Unfortunately, that's the best answer I can give you because there's just too many variables to give you an exact number. Rohan, I hope I said that right. How do you make a garden vertical? Well, you got to bring the substrate, the thing that the plants grow in, you got to bring those up, and you've got to bring the nutrients up, and you got to bring the light to it in some direction, and then you just repeat that over and over again. You can go vertical by going on a wall where your plants come out of the wall, and then a light is over here shining on it, and then all your water goes through the wall. You can go vertical by going horizontal, and then another deck and another deck like what we did in Have One, but then you got to bring your light in because of shadows that are created. So that's how you would go vertical. And our last question is from Enzo. How many crops have you grown? Well, we've grown watermelon, cantaloupe, squash, kiwi, peaches, apples, banana trees, garlic, potatoes, corn, green beans, a whole bunch of different types of lettuce, broccoli, cauliflower, corn, a whole bunch of different types of herbs. We've done a variety of microgreens. What else did we have? I think I just went through everything. Potatoes. Yeah, I love those potatoes. Yeah, so I think those are everything that we grew inside of Have One. So uh, to everybody at Odyssey Middle School and the Gryphons, I want to say thank you so much for providing me such amazing questions. You kids are just super freaking awesome. And I think you're all going to go someplace great if you listen to your teacher, listen to your parents, and keep learning like what you're doing. You will all have an opportunity to really help make the world a better place, and I pray that that's what you're all able to do. Thank you so much for your questions. And if you do have more, shoot them to me, and I'd be happy to do another one of these live streams for you. But I hope you guys are all staying safe. Keep your social distancing. Remember to wash your hands. I'm not very good at washing my hands. I get reminded all the time to wash my hands. So wash your hands, stay safe. Tell your parents thank you for keeping you on the straight path, and tell your teacher thank you for giving you wisdom and helping you learn all these great things. This is The Real Martian.